Will Australia ever develop nuclear weapons? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I'm going to talk about one of the most interesting and challenging national security questions of Australia. Should we develop or acquire nuclear weapons? Now, we have an interesting and varied history when it comes to nuclear weapons. After World War II, the British wanted to develop their own nuclear arsenal, and they needed an area to test their new program. Australia was that place. We welcomed them in. We provided material, money, fissile material, and of course a place for testing. And we were intimately involved in that process at Maralinga that saw Britain test its first nuclear devices. That gave us significant know-how in developing our own program, and there was an assumption that at some stage we may develop our own. This view continued, particularly when we had a very bad relationship with Indonesia prior to 1965. We did all kinds of sort of tests that fell outside nuclear weapons directly, but would help us develop in that area. We also later on had a policy to try to move towards being able to build a nuclear device. So we started building a nuclear power facility at Jervis Bay with the view of creating fissile material for a bomb. We also had a school at an Australian National University on nuclear physics that exists to this day to try and train up some new nuclear capabilities and various technological developments as well. When the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, was negotiated, there was an interpretation that because we had participated so much in the British nuclear program prior to 1967, we might be able to join as a nuclear weapon state in the future. And that convinced Australian officials that we could sign up as a non-nuclear weapon state for now. In the 1970s, when Gough Whitlam, Labor Prime Minister, was elected, he said, no, we're going to end all this and we're going to join permanently as a non-nuclear weapon state, and he ratified the treaty. Through the 1980s, so some successive Labor governments got involved here. Through the 1980s, we ceased a lot of that programming that would allow us to build nuclear material. So we stopped enrichment facilities and all kinds of other things to really wind back our nuclear capability with a view that we were never going to be a nuclear weapon state. Why not? Well, there was obviously an increasing global taboo against nuclear weapons, and Australia, considering itself to be a good international citizen, didn't want to be out of step with those movements, and so there was a lot of domestic support there as well. We didn't have nuclear power domestically. There was a lot of negative attitude towards it, and then of course the Chernobyl disaster soured views on nuclear power even more. So Australia has in a civil society kind of sense, a very negative attitude towards nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence. However, at a government level, that's not exactly the same view. And Australia has relied heavily on American policy of extended nuclear deterrence. That is, the United States has a policy that its allies do not need to develop nuclear weapons themselves, because if they're attacked with nuclear weapons, then the United States will respond with nuclear weapons on their behalf. It's a way of preventing proliferation among American allies and helping the American allies feel confident that they don't actually need the benefits of nuclear weapons, because they'll get that benefit from the United States without having the risks of a nuclear program. Australia, during the Cold War, was a strategic backwater. The epicenter of military crisis was in Europe, the struggle between the Soviet Union and the United States, the thousands, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at both sides, and then the nuclear battlefield potentially across Europe. Australia just wasn't part of that. The only nuclear threat that we directly faced was potentially from the Soviet Union at a couple of joint facilities here in Australia that were useful for America's deterrent. And that's about it. And then the potential maybe of Sukarno's Indonesia in the 1960s to have a nuclear program. But that was, extreme paranoia at best. Australia just didn't face a direct nuclear threat. Today, that is completely different. China, India, North Korea, probably Pakistan, they could all reach Australia with a nuclear weapon, as well as Russia. This is a proliferation across our region, so Australia could face a direct nuclear threat. Moreover, the potential for an actual attack on Australia is not negligible. I'll give you a scenario. Let's say the United States is in a major war with China, and China wants to demonstrate resolve without inviting a nuclear holocaust. Well, what if China was to launch a nuclear weapon at Australia? Now think about this. China would be demonstrating its ability to hit a target over intercontinental ranges without forcing America's hand by attacking them directly. It throws down the gauntlet to the United States because obviously if America doesn't retaliate, then it loses allies and credibility all across the world. But if America's in a situation where they have to choose between its top 10 cities just to swap for Beijing and Shanghai, are they really going to do that on behalf of Sydney or Brisbane, right? It's very unlikely. Much better for the United States not to be in that situation in the first place. So what's my view? I don't think Australia is going to develop nuclear weapons anytime soon. However, it is highly probable, not just likely, but probable, that the United States has already made the decision to allow Australia to have its own nuclear weapons provided to it by the United States themselves. That wouldn't have been enacted. This would be a situation if the world continues to deteriorate seriously. But it's in the American interest that Australia has nuclear weapons because it takes that whole situation off the table. North Korea, China, they're not going to attack Australia with nuclear weapons because they know that Australia will retaliate with nuclear weapons on its own behalf. It doesn't need to rely on the United States. And this mirrors what happened in the Cold War. It was very beneficial for Britain and France to have their own independent nuclear deterrent and really complicated Soviet war planning, but also encouraged these allies to be really active in standing up to America's primary strategic competitor because they knew that they had an ultimate deterrent themselves. Likewise, it's much more likely that if Australia feels absolutely confident that it has a reliable nuclear deterrent under its own control, for it to participate in things like navigation exercises in the South China Sea, standing up to China's belligerents, perhaps even joining collective defense arrangements with Japan and others, which we can talk about in another video. So the Americans themselves are probably more keen for us to have nuclear weapons than we are, right? So just an interesting fact to keep in mind. Will Australia's attitude towards nuclear weapons change? Well, there is a strong taboo against it in Australian civil society. Very anti-nuclear on all kinds of levels. We're not even able really to get more spent nuclear fuel facilities even though we have this massive, stable, uninhabited geological landmass that could really help the world and help us get rich doing it by storing spent fuel. Very hard to achieve that politically because of the taboo that's against nuclear of all kinds. Certainly us getting nuclear weapons would be extremely controversial. I think only tolerated by the electorate or even by the political class in an extreme overriding security situation. So I think this is a plan that is sitting there getting dust on the shelf. It could be taken down, but not just yet. There is a submarine program. We awarded the French the contracts to build our next generation submarines. The submarines designed are based on a nuclear plan, right, where very few countries in the world have nuclear-powered submarines but not nuclear weapons. And there are good reasons for that. The nuclear reactors involved are easily adapted for nuclear weapons. The fissile material in there is usually highly enriched. And yet we're building them as conventional submarines using all the design of a nuclear sub, but with conventional propulsion. This means that clearly Australia is leaving the door open to switching to nuclear in the future if that was to be an important consideration for us. And of course, we have huge coastlines, so long-range submarines such as nuclear-powered submarines would be beneficial for us even if we didn't have nuclear weapons. Then there is the final anecdote I'll leave you with before wrapping up. People know that we had an involvement in the British nuclear program, but fewer people know that we still have a strange kind of involvement. When the British Prime Minister is first elected, they must be locked in a room and hand write out orders for the submarine commanders that in the event that London is completely destroyed, what do those submarine commanders do? Do they, A, retaliate against whoever attacked them, destroy without prejudice foreign cities that destroyed Britain? Do they, B, dump those missiles into the sea because it's like, well, if Britain's already destroyed, what's the point of killing millions more people? But the British Civil Service also gives another option to the Prime Minister. That is to order the submarines to place themselves under Australian command. That is, that if the British government is destroyed, then rely on an ally that thinks the way they do and will act in their best interest, knowing all the facts. Ergo, if Britain is gone, well, the Australian government might be better placed to know who is responsible and what the right thing to do is, and be able to secretly provide orders to these submarine commanders with plausible deniability. You say, well, yeah, of course we had nothing to do with it. This was obviously the orders brought out by the Prime Minister themselves. Very interesting stuff. Now, what the British Prime Minister actually says is totally secret. It's sealed in that room. Nobody ever reads it. And the Prime Minister is replaced. Those previous orders are taken out and burned. So no one's ever read them. But it is an option provided to them because there is a sense of trust that even though Australia is a non-nuclear weapons state at the moment under the NPT, we are heavily involved in the nuclear thinking of our nuclear armed partners. I'll just leave you with that. If you found value in this discussion, this kind of overview, I don't think we're going to get nuclear weapons unless there's an overriding threat, but I do suspect plans are already in process should that threat emerge. Please do like and subscribe. We will track this and all kinds of other related issues in the future. If you have your own view, it's a highly controversial topic, so welcome debate. Just be polite. Leave the comment down below and we will address them, particularly in the Week in Review. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.